Okay, so this is part three. I told you it was going to take a while. This is part three of Aishet Chayil, and I fully expect to finish today. And it is also the week of Bamidbar, the beginning of the book of Bamidbar, which is the fourth of the five books of the five books of Moses. So we are humming along, but we've missed we've missed like the last four parsha. Last week was a double parsha. Um, and so I really want to finish this with you so that we can go back to parsha next week, which is parsha Naso. But I want to tell you the story. So when I was first becoming religious, there's an organization in Baltimore. I think it still exists. It's called Eitz Chaim. And the point of the organization was to take people like me, people who were Jewish but who didn't have any back. I'm going back 35 plus years, who didn't have any background, and to teach them stuff. And I remember that the rabbi there, his name is Rabbi Shlomo Porter, he taught a class called something like Torah line by line. And it took them months and months to make progress because, as you're seeing a little bit, like the Torah is endlessly deep. So anything that we choose to study, so in Jewish in the Jewish approach, there's basically two ways that you can study Torah. There's something called Bekias, which is sort of like the broad overview, and then there's Be'iyun, which is like going deep, drilling deep, 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 deep into a particular piece of Torah. And so I would say with Eshet Chayil, I've never done this with you before, taken 3 weeks to talk about these 22 verses. But you can get like a sense that it took them months to do a single Torah portion. Okay. I once, in my former community, we had a Torah class every Shabbat afternoon, and about once a month I would teach. And for a little while, I was teaching what I called Navi in an hour. What does that mean? Navi is prophets. And I started with the book of Joshua, and I did like a 1 hour summary of all of the stories and all of the highlights of the book of Joshua. And then I went on to um, Shmuel, Samuel, and then Kings and so forth. And I tried to condense the content of each of these books into an hour. Now, just to remind people sort of what the highlights were. So, for the most part, when we study, like if my idea is that when we finish the Torah cycle, that next year I might want to do with you, if anybody's interested in this, the Haftorah, which are selections from the books of prophets that have some relationship to the Torah reading. There's a whole history there, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get into it now because we have Eshet Chayil to go through. But I was thinking about doing that, but it's not the same as, for example, starting in the book of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 1, and going through it chronologically. But it is another way to go through sort of the annual cycle. Or, I mean, we could do Parsha year after year after year until we're all um, no longer cognitively capable. But I don't want to do that. So I was just thinking about that. But let's go back to Asia Chayil. This is my fourth time trying to bring myself back. Okay, we left off on chapter 31, verse 26. And the verse is, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and a lesson of kindness is on her tongue. So we're finishing up the second pass through of who is the woman in Tanakh that these verses are an allusion to. Okay. And so this allusion, and the key word here is wisdom. The key word from this verse is wisdom. This is from a story that's in Shmuel Bet, 2 Samuel, chapter 20, verses 16 through 22. Okay. This is here's the story. The person that it is about, her name, she isn't named in Shmuel Bet. She's just referred to as a wise woman, but we know her name through our tradition as Serach Bat Asher. I'm not sure if I spoke to you about her before. She's one of my favorite biblical women characters. And so I'm just going to review with you. Serach, not to be confused with Sarah. So in English, it's Serach, Serach, was the daughter, the granddaughter of Jacob, the granddaughter of Yaakov. Okay. Yaakov had these 12 sons. One of them was Asher. And Serach, we call her Serach bat Asher, Serach, daughter of Asher. Serach was one of the granddaughters, the many granddaughters. Linda, hi, thanks for joining us. You might want to mute yourself. Okay. And there are several stories in our rabbinic tradition that talk about her wisdom. Her great merit and why we remember her is because she was the one who, when she was a little girl, she brought the news to Yaakov, to Jacob, that after many years, his son Joseph, his son Yosef, was still alive and was a ruler in Egypt. Okay. And the story goes that rather than come out and tell him directly, because she didn't want to, God forbid, give him a heart attack with this sudden news that they've been separated for all these decades, she played on her harp and she sang a song about my uncle Yosef is still alive and he's a ruler over Egypt. And as a result, her grandfather Yaakov, Jacob, gave her a blessing that she would live forever. Now, there is this book called Serach's Song. It's a little children's book. There's not much to it. But it is a story about Serach for children. This part of the story that she's a little girl. See if you see on the cover, she's a little girl with a harp. I know it's hard with this background, but can you get the gist of it? I'm not even sure this book is still in print, but when I lived in America, I massively bought any books that had anything to do with like women in Tanakh. Okay, so um, she had a secret that was passed to her because I guess her father, her uncles understood that she was a wise person, even as a young person. And so they passed on to her the secret of how the people could trust that the true Redeemer had arrived. Now, we're not talking about Mashiach here exactly. We're talking about Moses, the Redeemer in that time. But the secret was passed from father to son, beginning with Abraham, and was eventually passed on to her through her father Asher. Okay. Now, this is already very interesting and very unusual for a girl slash a female to have access to this level of secret. She's the only one who lived through the entire 210 years of slavery in Egypt. So remember that she was a little girl when Joseph got reconnected with his brothers, and then he invites them all to come to Egypt and everything's fine until the brothers die and then the slavery starts and it's 210 years. Okay, so it's a very long period of time. She remembers where Joseph's bones are buried, and because there's a promise not to leave Egypt without the bones of Joseph, Moses needs her help to locate these bones, okay, to find the casket so that the bones can be carried with them and the Israelite nation can actually leave Egypt. So she plays a really crucial role um, in that story. But later on, there's a story that many, many moons later, there's a study hall, a Beit Midrash. And there's a Rabbi Yochanan by name, and he's describing to his students about the Exodus from Egypt and how the waters of the Red Sea split. And he described them in one way. He described them as looking like lattice work. And she, however you understand this, her soul, her voice, her somehow she appears in this study hall and she says to him, and I love this, it's so much chutzpah. She says, I was there and it didn't look the way you described, it looked like glass. So you may be familiar, maybe I taught you this idea that the sea, the traditional Cecil B. DeMille version is that the sea splits in half and everybody walks down. But the Jewish tradition is that the sea split into 12 channels. And in order that everybody who's going through is reassured that everybody else is making it, according to what Serach told Rabbi Yochanan, the walls were glass, so or like glass, so that everybody could see to their right and to their left that all the other tribes were also getting through, and that was very reassuring for them. Okay, so she's identified as this wise woman in Second Samuel chapter 20. And the story is that she saves her town by getting the townspeople to agree to kill the. So Yoav is David's general, and he wants to basically burn down the city because this enemy is there. And she says, don't burn down the city. We're going to turn this bad guy over to you. I'm paraphrasing. You can go look in Shmuel Bet in Second Samuel and just read the story yourself. And what she does is she convinces the townspeople to kill this guy, cut off his head, and throw it over the city walls. And in that way, she saves the entire town. Okay, that's the wisdom of Serach Bat Asher. Okay, so it's only because the rabbis have preserved her stories that we know that this is her. Okay. And the other stories that I told you, those are her because it's not always so clear. Okay. Let's go on. Chapter 31, verse 27. She anticipates the ways of her household and partakes not of the bread of laziness. This is a reference to the wife of the prophet Ovadiah. And we find this story in Malachim Bet in 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. So here's the story. Israel is ruled at this time by King Ahab, bad guy, married to, you probably know her as Jezebel, okay? Also, not a lovely woman. And Jezebel, Zevel, we call her, but I'll call her Jezebel. Um, she worshipped something other than the true God. Okay, she was an idol worshiper. And she hated the prophets and she wanted them all killed. So the wife of the prophet Ovadiah helped her husband hide and feed 100 prophets in a cave. During this, there was a famine for 3 years, and this raging queen who wants to get rid of all of the prophets of the God of Israel. And so they're hiding in a cave for years, and she and her husband are supporting them and bringing them food. Um, Now, Ovadia was originally a wealthy man, but he eventually ran out of money because this is quite an expensive undertaking, and he has to borrow a lot of money in order to continue to feed these 100 prophets that he's hiding to help support them. It says that the wife of Ovadia, whose name I do not know, um, worked hard to help her husband support the prophets in hiding, and that's where the connection is to the verse, partaking not of the bread of laziness. Okay, she worked hard to keep them hidden and keep them fed. Now, Ovadia and the prophet Ovadia and the king Achav, they died at the same time, around the same time. And the next king is Jehoram, who is the son of Jezebel and Achav. He becomes king after his father dies. Ovadia is very deeply in debt. And he's in debt actually to Jehoram. And so now Ovadia dies, and the new king, the son of Jezebel and Achav, comes knocking on the door of Ovadia's widow to say, you owe me money, and if a lot of money, and if you don't give me money, I'm going to take your sons as slaves into my household if you don't repay the entire sum. Now, not surprisingly, Ovadia's wife doesn't have any money. So she also knows that if they are to be taken into slavery, they're going to be exposed to idol worship. Because remember, this is the son of Jezebel and Achav. So, so she prays for an answer, and this is where um, the part of the verse she anticipated the needs of her sons, who were her remaining household, to live free from idol worship. Okay, that's just the connection to the verse. Here's what happens in prayer. So she's praying. She's a very holy woman, and she's been doing very holy work for a long time. And so she hears her husband's voice. He's already dead, but he says to her to take a small container of oil that was in the house and bring it to the prophet Elisha. Okay, so Elijah has a main student named Alicia. At this point in the story, Alicia's the main guy, and ask the prophet Elisha to bless her little bit of oil. And so she's instructed to tell Alicia the story that her husband borrowed all this money only to sustain the prophets of God and not for his own selfish needs. And in that merit, Alicia should bless her with some way to repay the new king. And this is where 2 weeks ago, I think it was, I sent a picture, a piece of art that I used to own. I don't own it anymore, but it is an image called Alicia's Blessing. And Alicia instructs the widow of Ovadia to go to all of her neighbors and collect as many vessels as possible and to pour from her small jar of oil into the borrowed vessels. And as long as there's an empty vessel to pour into, the oil kept coming. That was Alicia's blessing. And so she was able to do that. And she sold all the oil that miraculously came out of this small jar that she had. And she was able to repay the king and save her sons and also have enough money to sustain her family on. That's that story. Okay. Um, there's another Alicia story that's connected to the next verse, Alicia and another woman, chapter 31, verse 28. Her children arise and praise her, her husband, and he lauds her, which is another way of saying praise. Okay. And this is also in Malachim Bet, 2 Kings, chapter 4, verses 8 through 37. This is the story of the Shunammite woman. Um, and what is her story? So the prophet Elisha travels to this town called Shunem, and there's a prominent woman there, a wealthy woman there. She invites him to a meal, and she understands that this is a great man. And she convinces her husband to build an extra room so that Elisha will have a place to stay. Like she opens up an Airbnb basically for Elisha anytime he's in town. Okay. And in gratitude for her hospitality, Alicia says, how can I bless you? And she says, I have no needs. I have plenty of money. I don't need anything. But what she doesn't have is children. And so Alicia promises her that in a year she's going to have a son. And in fact, that happens. The son is born. And just like Alicia promised, and the son is growing up. And then one day he falls ill and he dies. And the Shunammite woman saddles up her donkey and she travels to wherever Alicia is because he's not staying in her house at this time. And she demands that Alicia revive her dead child. She said, I didn't ask you for this child. Remember, you asked me, what can I do? What can you do for me? And I said, I don't need anything. You gave me a child, and now this child is dead. You have to bring him back to life. And so first Alicia sends his servant with instructions on what to do, and the servant is not successful. And so finally Alicia comes himself and he's able to revive the this is an incredible I'm saying it kind of matter of fact, but it's really quite an incredible story that he's able to revive this dead boy, bring him back to life. And the drama of the revival of the dead son is done without the husband knowing anything until the story's over, because the Shunammite woman, this Isha Gedolah, this great woman, is so certain that Alicia is going to be able to restore life to this dead child that she doesn't want to upset her husband with the news that the kid died. Okay. And this connects to her husband lauds her. That's the from the verse. Also, her husband followed her advice. She said, we need to build a room. We need to open this Airbnb for Alicia whenever he comes to our town. And so the husband realizes how praiseworthy his wife is. And the last connection to this, the verse says that her children, wait, it is exactly, her children arise. This is an allusion to the fact that due to her intervention, her son literally arose, like arose from the dead. That's very cool. Um, okay, the last is it 3 verses? The last 3 verses of Aishet Chayil are all about Ruth. Many daughters have amassed achievement, but you have surpassed them all. Okay, this is verse 29. It refers to Ruth, who is a Moabite, who eventually, the way we say is she comes under the wings of the Shekhinah, meaning she joins the Israelite nation. Um, the next verse also refers to Ruth. False is grace, and vain is beauty. False is grace, and vain is beauty. A God-fearing woman, she should be praised. Okay, so what is the praise of Ruth? She left her mother's house and her nation and the wealth that she had. Remember that Ruth and her sister Orpah were princesses in Moab. They were half sisters, the daughters of Eglon, the king of Moab. And so she comes from prominence, and she left all that to follow her impoverished, widowed mother-in-law, and to take on for herself the all of the um, we call it the yoke of mitzvot, but the the necessity to live according to the Torah's guidelines at that time. Okay, and so there's some examples of some of the laws that she took on. um, so Naomi teaches her the laws, for example, of where on Shabbat you're allowed to walk. There's limitations for how far you can walk on Shabbat, and this is what the Midrash says is what this conversation was all about. You're going to recognize when you hear Ruth's response, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. That when Ruth says, "Wherever you go, I will go." That is her answer to Naomi teaching her, on Shabbat, there's rules about where you can go and where you can't go. And Ruth says, wherever you go, I will go. She accepts the prohibition about being secluded with another man. And she says, wherever you stay, I will stay. Um, and she accepts upon herself all of the 613 mitzvot, and she says, "Your God shall be my God." And Naomi teaches her about the four death penalties that are meted out by the Jewish court, and she says, "As you die, I will die, and I will be buried with you." So the rabbis say they see in this a hint to the praises of Ruth, that she is so meritorious for this that she becomes the grandmother, the great grandmother of King
Appreciate.
David. And I always forget how many generations it is. Oh, it's um, Ovid is the child. Then there's Yishai, and then David. Am I skipping a generation? She's the grand.
Isaac is
She's the
the
mother of Ovid and the grandmother of Yishai and the great grandmother of David. I think that's right.
great great grandma.
Great grandmother, right? Okay, so she herself is meritorious, but also she is in the line of David, who wrote and arranged many songs and praises to God. So that's another praise thing. And the final verse before we go into the third way of understanding this, give her the fruits of her hands and let her be raised in the gates by her very own deeds. Okay. So again, these last three verses refer to Ruth, who merited to be the great grandmother of King David. She gave up everything in order to follow her Jewish mother-in-law in poverty and disgrace back to Israel. It's very cool this time of year because we read the book of Ruth on Shavuos, and Shavuos is here it's Sunday night, Monday. And in America or outside of Israel, anywhere outside of Israel, it's 2 days. So it's Sunday night, Monday, Monday night, Tuesday. But we read the book of Ruth on the holiday of Shavuos, also known as Shavuot, which literally means weeks. And what's cool is that they are coming back to Beit Lechem, to Bethlehem, which is like
Ef- 'Efrata.
two kilometers from where I am sitting right now. Okay. Um, and again, in the conversation, when they're on the road and Naomi's trying to dissuade her from coming along, Ruth offers a counter to every point that Naomi tries to make. And I gave you some examples of that. Naomi says, you can't do this. And she says, I will go where you will go, blah, blah, all that. Okay. Now there's a question about what was the status of Ruth and her sister, her half sister Orpah, who were the wives of the sons of Naomi. Did they convert or did they not convert? Because if they've converted already to marry the sons of Naomi, why is it like a big deal that, she was already in? Um, And so there's some people who argue that they must have converted. Because Naomi and Elimelech were very prominent in the beginning of their journey in Moab. They had money, they were very wealthy, they were highly placed in Israeli society, and they married their sons. Well, the truth is that Elimelech had already died before any of these marriages happened. But Naomi was still from prominence. How could she have agreed, or how could the sons have taken foreign wives without any kind of conversion? And um, and if they converted, how could Naomi send these now they're Jewish or whatever they are, Israel. I don't know where we are, and I have to think about that. But they are now part of the Jewish people of Am Yisrael, which is the Jewish nation, the Israelite nation. How could she have sent them back to Moab if they had converted? Do you understand? That's like saying taking somebody who has become a Jew today and saying, go move to a community where there's no Jews and nobody's religious in any way, and there's no kosher food, and go live your life there. Like, that would be a disaster. Okay. So the question is, you hear the question, like, were they converted or were they not converted? But there are people who argued that they couldn't have converted, and that's why Naomi argued so strongly. She doesn't want to go back to Beit Lechem, to Bethlehem, with these two women from Moab who are not part of her nation. Um, and she's ashamed to return to her people with these daughters-in-law who don't belong. So, one possible solution or resolution for this dilemma is like this. I told you that Ruth and Orpah they came from royalty in Moab. And so there's an idea that they had some kind of conversion, but it wasn't like a what we would call today like a halachic conversion. It wasn't a completely legitimate conversion that it might have taken place, but it was really kind of invalid, half invalid, um, because of there being an element of coercion or something like that. So as a result, Naomi's conversation on the road back from Moab to Beit Lechem is a test to see whether their original conversion was valid or not. And were they sincere in seeing themselves as part of Am Yisrael, of the nation of Israel? Um, and so Orpah, we know, because I taught you this, that she returned to Moab and that she proved that her conversion, whatever it was not valid, and she returned to idol worship. But Ruth passed the test and proved her desire to be part of this nation. And the Talmud there's I don't know if it's a lot of laws of conversion from this conversation, because there's three times that Naomi says to the girls, her daughters-in-law, go back to your mother's house, leave. You don't want to come with me, whatever she says. And the tradition today is that when a prospective convert approaches a rabbi and says, I want to be a Jew, they're turned away three times. Now, the first two times, Orpah and Ruth said, no, 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 we're going with you, we're going with you. The third time, Orpah turns away and Ruth clings to her. Okay. And so now Naomi understands that Ruth has a firm intention to remain with her, to live among the Jewish people, and she begins to explain additional laws to her. Um, and so there's another interpretation of where you go, I will go. And that is, Naomi says to Ruth, Jewish women don't go to pagan theaters and circuses where there's lewdness. And Ruth says, wherever you go, I will go. And Naomi says, a Jewish woman doesn't live in a house that doesn't have a mezuzah on the door. And she says, where you lodge, I will lodge. Naomi says, we've been given 613 commandments. And Ruth says, your people shall be my people. That is, I'm part of the people that keep these 613 commandments. Naomi says, idol worship is forbidden. And Ruth says, your God shall be my God, and so on and so on. Okay. And then we get to chapter 1, verse 18 in the book of Ruth, which we'll be reading later this week. Well, early next week. And Naomi sees that Ruth is not going to be dissuaded. And so she stops offering arguments. And the and from there we learn, while we are supposed to turn away a prospective convert 3 times, not we're not supposed to dissuade them so much. It's like a little test, to see how sincere they are, how much they really want this. It's not, as you know, I've said to you many, many times, this is not a goal of Judaism to make the whole world Jewish. But if somebody's soul needs to join this people, there is a way in, but it's not a simple thing. It's not like I've heard, I don't even know anything about Muslim law, but I've heard that if you want to become a Muslim, have you ever heard this? That you like go to an imam or something and you say, I want to be a Muslim, and he does whatever he does. And then like in a half an hour, you're a Muslim. So it is not like that in Judaism. Um, and so in verse 19, it says that they went, the two of them. Okay. The indication is that Ruth has been accepted by Naomi as being sincere, and that they are now um, sort of equals on the path, and they are returning to the land of Israel. That Nami treats her as an equal, and recognizes the fact that she's leaving her birthplace and she's leaving her people. Ruth herself walks towards the land of Israel with the same strength and determination as Naomi, because they are now both going home, even though Ruth theoretically has never been there. Okay, that is the second sivuv, the second time through. And now I want to go through the verses one more time, and this will be a lot faster. I should be able to finish this in a half an hour. Not all of the verses have a connection, um, but a number of them do. Okay. So now we're going back to chapter 31, verse 10, where I'm going to show you how the rabbis are teaching us on a deeper level that while we have talked about each of these verses being a description of like the ideal woman or relating to another woman in Tanakh, now I'm going to show you that they all relate to the concept of Torah. Torah in Hebrew is a feminine word, and so I'm going to show you how many of these verses are related to Torah. Let me show you what I mean. We'll do one, and then I think that you will see. Okay, an accomplished woman who can find far beyond pearls is her value. In this way of thinking, a wife is analogous to the Torah, and her husband is analogous to the Jewish people. Okay, so there's a relationship between a husband and a wife, and the Torah and the Jewish people. So just as a husband and wife are wed, so the Torah and the Jewish people are wed. And the virtuous wife that this whole thing is about is analogous to the Torah in that they both serve the purpose of bringing spiritual qualities into this world and into the world to come. The gematria, the Hebrew numerical value of the Hebrew of the word Chayil, which Aishet Chayil, right? We've talked about that word a few times, is 48. And the rabbis say in Pirkei Avot, which is what is it in English? Chapters of the Fathers. It is actually a book of Mishnah, but it's all kind of life lessons. That there are 48 qualities that are essential in order to acquire Torah knowledge. So Eshet Chayil, the word Chayil appears in that verse. The numerical value of Chayil is 48. And that corresponds to what the rabbis say are the 48 qualities of somebody who desires to acquire Torah knowledge. Okay, so that's one example. Let's look at another. Verse 11. Her husband's heart relies on her, and he shall lack no fortune. So there's something in Hebrew, we call it a chiddush. It is like a novel insight into Torah. Okay. And so a person might think that there's a certain pleasure when you come up with a creative or an original idea about Torah, because you've really been immersed in it, you've really been studying it, and you see something that you think nobody's seen before. That's called a chiddush. And somebody might think, there's a finite number of new insights that the world can come up with. And so it would be better if the number of people studying Torah was small, which would give you like a more of a crack at coming up with a novel insight. Um, because you may be concerned you'll never have anything original to say, but that's not the case. Because in this verse, when it says, he shall lack no fortune, that is telling us there is enough wisdom in the Torah for 6,000 years of study by the masses, by all the people who are ever going to study Torah. Um, Verse 12, she repays his good, but never his harm all the days of her life. All the days of her life means that as long as the Torah exists, it does it does a person good. Okay. That I don't know that there's more to say about that. That um, you never run out of, you could, let's say that you are a mathematician or you're a historian or something. At some point in your career as an academic, you're going to master what there is to know about your field. What this verse is telling us is all the days of her life means no matter how long you live, no matter how many days, months, weeks, hours, whatever you spend studying Torah, you'll never run out of it and it will always be good for you. I I think it was Vicky I was telling my notes on this are like a big mess and it's like 30 pages and I haven't taken the time to retype them. So and I don't have a digital copy of them. I only have like these, well, you can't see, but like all these sheets. So so I have to go through and find the things that I want to say to you. Okay, verse 13. She seeks out wool and linen and her hands work willingly. Apparently I have nothing to say on that verse, but let's go on. 14. She is like a merchant ship. From afar she brings her sustenance. This is a reference to a Torah scholar who knows how to connect things in Torah. Now, today we have computers and we have the internet, we have hypertext, where I remember the first time, this was 30 years ago, and I was sitting in my office. I used to work at the University of Maryland, and somebody came into my office, the tech guy, and he explains like we're all going to get internet access. And he explains to me, just imagine you don't you there must have been a time all of you heard it for the first time, but he explains to me how this internet thing works. So he says, imagine if there's a map of the US, and we were in Baltimore at the time. And he said, you click on Baltimore and it opens up a whole bunch of information about Baltimore. I remember thinking, like, that is so cool. But traditionally, when people study Torah, they have many, many different books, and one book has this source and one book has this source, and they may be all spread out on a table and they go from one to another. That's the way people studied before we had computers. Okay. Now the from afar she brings her sustenance means that you could bring proof from of some point you're trying to make from one part of Torah from a whole other part of Torah. In the days when we did that manually, that was you it meant you had to know where to look, which book to pull off the shelf, where to find the reference for to make the point that you want to make. It's a lot easier now with computers because they make a lot of those connections for you. But anyway, that's the connection to this verse. The next verse is she arises while it is yet nighttime and gives food to her household and a ration to her maidens. This is a reference to people who study Torah at night, that they sit and they are occupied in Torah the entire night. The nighttime, not that there's any bad time to learn Torah, but the nighttime, because the world is quiet and there's fewer distractions, both for Torah study and actually for prayer, um, there's there's something special about that. But there's another idea that when somebody devotes their days to studying, that God, in other words, they don't work, like they study Torah full time, as we have in the Jewish community, hundreds of thousands of people like that. God summons their sustenance from afar to bring them what they need. They're not going to a job every day, like a normal job, and earning money. So how are they being supported? So the idea here is that God is summoning their sustenance from afar. He's bringing them what they need. Um, okay. Verse 16, she envisions a field and buys it. From the fruit of her handiwork, she plants a vineyard. This is so one of the ways that Torah scholars get supported in Israel. There's some support by public monies, like tax money and so forth, but there's also a whole system of private donors who provide financial support to people who decide to make their um, livelihood the study of Torah. Livelihood is not the right word. To make their job the study of Torah. Now, this is controversial in some circles because a lot of our great Torah scholars also had like a real job. Um, but there's a relationship between two of the tribes, Yisachar and Zvulun. And Yisachar was the student, and Zvulun, his brother, made a promise to him that if you study Torah, I will support you financially, and we will both benefit from whatever spiritual merit you have. So he freed his brother to devote himself to full-time Torah study. And that's the idea here, that people who provide financial support for students of Torah um, invigorate their arms to fill like they work hard to fill the pockets of Torah scholars, meaning to get them money and to support them physically. Okay, verse 18. She discerns that her enterprise is good, so her lamp is not snuffed out at night. The soul, neshama, which is also a feminine word, is able to perceive the value of Torah study more than the body is. The body may be able to perceive the value of a steak dinner more than the soul can. But when we're talking about things in the spiritual realm, it is the neshama, it is the soul that is kind of running the show. And so the soul perceives the value of Torah study clearly. That, and what's the verse say? Discerns that her enterprise is good, that the work of Torah study is good. It sacrifices sleep willingly in order to continue studying by the light of the lamp. And that's the part of the verse that says, her lamp is not snuffed out by night. But then there's another idea that the soul continues to study, to toil in Torah. In the mornings, we have a blessing that we make where we bless God for requiring us to be לעסוק בדברי Torah. It is to immerse ourselves in the study of Torah. And actually, there's a rule that you're not supposed to study Torah on any given day as a Jew. You're not supposed to study Torah on any given day until you make this blessing, thanking God for the mitzvah of studying Torah. And so this is the soul continues to study until she, that is the soul, perceives the full spiritual brilliance of the lamp of Torah. There's a lot of we could do a whole study about this, how Torah is compared to light, um, and the light of Torah, the idea of the light that God put into the world and hid in the Torah. There's a whole bunch of stuff to say about that, but that's the connection to that verse. Um, I'm going to skip chapter 19, verse 19. It's got nothing to say about that. Or, well, wait, or 20 or 21. This is all the Rachab stuff. Okay, I do have something to say on 21. Um, she fears not snow for her household, for her entire household is clothed in scarlet wool. Um, she fears not snow for her household refers to the fact that a person who studies Torah, when a young couple gets married, a young Jewish couple get married, we bless them that they should build a Bayit Ne'eman b'Yisrael, which means a faithful home in Israel. Now, we don't necessarily literally mean in Israel, although when you go to a wedding in Israel, it literally means in Israel, but it means, like among the nation of Israel, that a home, a holy home, is built from above. If the person has been consistent, if the study has been consistent and of high quality, the home, that is the household, will be of high quality. and there'll be no need to worry about money, to fear the cold, because the foundation is strong. Her entire household is clothed in scarlet wool is a reference to the fact that if your Torah study is on a high level, then the home that you're building reflects God's glory. The way that scarlet clothes, I think I mentioned to you that scarlet clothes are like a symbol of royalty. Okay. So there's the connection there between um, protecting your home and making it shine and making it elevated the way so I'm distracted because I'm flipping pages here. Um, Elevated the way that a royal household is elevated. Okay. I'm moving on to verse 25. Strength and majesty are her raiment. She joyfully awaits her last day. So there's an idea that whoever's occupied with Torah for its own sake. So there's a distinction that we make in Judaism about people who study Torah, like let's say you study molecular biology. I don't even know what that is exactly, but whatever. In order that you can get a job as a molecular biologist, whatever that is, okay, you have a purpose, right? Because they make a lot of money, or you can easily get a job, or the job meets your lifestyle, whatever. That is, you're studying for a particular purpose. Torah is studied what we call lishma, for its own sake. So not you don't want to get a title, you're not going to get a degree, you're not going to get a job as a result of this. You study Torah just because it elevates your soul, because it elevates your family, because it connects you more to God. So that's what we call studying Torah for its own sake. And a person who does that is granted many things. Okay. So the commentary that I saw is that it compare it to a business that offers its customers free gifts when they make a large purchase. Okay, so God is rewarding us with good things in this world, theoretically, when you are occupied with Torah for its own sake. So God rewards people who spend their time in Torah study with this bonus that's mentioned in this verse of strength and majesty. And also, there's an idea. So the other part of this verse is a reference to she joyfully awaits the last day. I understand that to mean the day before she dies. But the Torah only reveals its true wisdom just before death. This is a revelation that the Torah is smiling upon a person close to death. So we sometimes say, like, you know the expression, you can't take it with you, right? Which refers to anything in the material world. So um, whatever bone there's a word for this that I'm thinking. Whatever merit you accumulate through life because of time that you have spent studying God's word, that smiles upon you. That speaks well for you. Just we should all live to 120, but that speaks well for you at the end of your life. Okay. Verse 26. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and a lesson of kindness is on her tongue. Um, the Talmud says that a student who studies at night is extended extra loving kindness during the day. Okay, because this verse um, refers to a lesson of kindness is on her tongue, that they are the beneficiaries of kindness, of the kindness of God, because they exerted themselves for God, exerted themselves to learn His Torah. And by the way, I want to say this. Learning Torah is not like learning let's say mathematics or something, or any accounting or whatever. It's not a question of like learning a bunch of facts. Learning Torah in and of itself, what we're doing right here, right now, is its own spiritual reward. Is if you don't remember a single thing that I say an hour from now, you have still engaged in Torah study. And while we are talking about words of Torah, your soul is engaged. Hopefully, if you're not sleeping, your soul is engaged, your mind is engaged, you are connecting, hopefully, some of this in some way, you are connecting to God. And that is its own reward. If this was a college class. And I was going to get now, okay, we've had 3 sessions on Aishet Chayil, and next week there's going to be a quiz. I was going to give you a quiz. Even if you failed the quiz, you don't remember anything, there is benefit to the time that you spend engaged in Torah study, not in um, remembering things. Do you understand the distinction that I'm making here? That, yeah, okay. Um, so the Talmud says that a student who studies at night, because again, nighttime has this special quality, is particularly rewarded during the day. All right, we're going to finish this very soon because we are up to verse 29. Verse 29, many daughters have amassed achievement, but you surpass them all. Okay, so in Hebrew, when we say many daughters, it's rabot banot. Banot is daughters. Rabot means many. Many daughters. Asu chayil. They achieved or amassed achievement. Chayil is the word I taught you about before, that it literally means valor. It's related to strength. I told you that it's referred to soldiers. Today we refer to soldiers as chayalim or chayal. So it's all these positive and desirable characteristics that are associated with this. And so with every word of Torah that we learn, we fulfill now I'm this actually this language probably really only applies to Jews, but we fulfill another mitzvah, and with each mitzvah that creates another advocate to defend our soul in judgment. So a more literal translation of Rabo Banota Suchayil, which means many daughters have amassed achievement, is that many daughters have, quote, made soldiers. That is, from each mitzvah, an angelic advocate is created to defend the soul in the next world. That's a little esoteric. I'm not sure if you like that one, but okay. The is the last one or the second to the last one? This is the second to the last one. Verse 30, false is grace and vain is beauty. A God-fearing woman, she should be praised. So the idea here is that whoever is occupied with the Torah, um, if a person is occupied with the Torah and learns that the true value of fearing God over more ephemeral values like grace and beauty, but also like material acquisition and so forth. The idea is that God raises the reputation of such a person in the eyes of others. So it was interesting that I was with a friend who I've known for a while, and she said something about the kind of work she does. And I thought, when I lived in America, I knew what everybody's job was. Like that was something you talked about. Oh, I'm a this, oh, I'm a that, I'm a doctor, I'm a social worker, I'm whatever. I have been friends with people in Israel for many years. I have no clue what they do for a living. It's just like it's not so like relevant here. Or it's not as relevant here because we have sort of a different set of value. I'm not saying that in Tel Aviv it's not relevant. That may be, but in the circles in which I travel, you can be friends with somebody, know their whole family, have many Shabbat meals with them, do this, do that, and you never talk about work because it's a different set of values. And so the idea is when you when your life is devoted to Torah study, you're like on a different, I don't want to overstate it, but like you're on a different set of values. And I'll finish with this. Um, Give her the fruit of her hand and let her be raised in the gates by her very own deeds. So there's this concept of God giving merit in this world, which is a finite world, and also merit in the next world. So the idea is that one who studies Torah now partakes of the fruit in this world, meaning whatever benefits that come from knowing Torah, from living a life connected to God through Torah study, those are benefits now, but you don't use them up. In the next world, you're rewarded, maybe even more so, because the next world is infinite, rewarded for the Torah study that you did in this world, for the way that you followed God in this world, for the um, the moral and ethical way that you lived in this world. You not only do people admire you in this world, or they treat you well, or whatever the benefits are, they look up to you, they study with you, whatever the benefits are here, but God is preserving a reward for you in the next world. And the opposite of that is something that we studied this. It's a very similar idea that we studied from the other angle in when we talked about the Ishmaelite exile. This is way over a year ago. I don't remember exactly the class. Some of you may not even been with us yet, but some of you were. And we talked about this idea that the Muslims do certain things that please God, right? They pray 5 times a day. They are known to be um, charitable among themselves. They are clearly very devoted to the to a sick extent, but not all of them are like that. But anyway, there's an idea that when they do those godly things, that God rewards them. And his reward, this is what the Ishmaelite exile talks about, their reward to some extent is how successful that they have been in spreading their twisted version of reality in around the world. However, they're rewarded in this world. That means, unlike what I just said about somebody who's true to Torah, whose reward is maybe somewhat, they get some fruit in this world, but the principle remains intact for them in the world to come. We even say that in our morning prayers, exactly that. But the Muslims in the Ishmaelites, I'm really speaking about the terrorists. You understand? I'm not talking about like good Muslims around the world, but they may be rewarded right now, but there's a finite nature of their reward because it's in this world. They got nothing waiting. There's no 70 virgins. There's nothing good waiting for them. They're using it all up. And when their merit is used up, God will bring them down. And the truth is, I don't know how many of you follow Hillel Fuld. Yeah, Helen, any of you that are on Facebook or X or any, you should follow this guy Hillel Fuld. He lives here, and he wrote something today, and he said basically today has been a turning point. What happened today is that they began to distribute food in this new way without Hamas being in the middle of it. What that means is that Hamas is losing its grip. This is, I mean, he explains it much better. And if you want, if anybody's interested, I can screenshot if you're not on Facebook, whatever, I can screenshot what he said. But it was a very interesting way of saying that their end is coming. Now, is the war over? No, the war's not over. Are the hostages out? No, it's 599 days. I cannot believe I have been doing this for 500 days. But of course, they've been suffering much worse. But anyway, he said this is a turning point because now the people of Gaza can get access to food without going through Hamas, and that shows that Hamas is losing its hold. It's losing its hold on the people that are there. It's losing its access to because you probably know what has been going on. Anyway, I don't want to get all political and current events on you, but I thought that was connected somehow to the point that I was making about when their merit is used up, God will bring them down. And we should all live long enough to see it. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. That's what I prepared. Next week we will go back to Parsha. I'd like to know if any of you have any questions or comments or anything you want to say before we finish. Natalie.
Yes, I wanted to, when you were speaking about Ruth, I was speaking about the burial place in Hebron where she is buried. And it's getting more and more beautiful. People are really looking after the place now. And there is Ruth and Yishai.
Right.
So it's interesting for people to know that.
Listen, today I did an interview with, the story of the pregnant woman who
Yeah,
was
yeah.
killed, right? Okay.
Tesla.
Selah, right.
Yeah.
I did an interview with her mother-in-law today, which I'm going to write up and it'll be in the Jerusalem Post. Anyway, she says to me, I want to say this to you because we're getting close to Shavuos when we read the book of Ruth, and my name is Naomi. Her mother-in-law's name is Naomi. And she said, it is exactly that. So her mother-in-law has taken over, the woman that I interviewed, the grandmother of these children, has taken over caring for them, right? I mean, they're only like in the first week after Shiva, so it's still very, very early. But she said, I have, it's like the roles are reversed. It's what Ruth and Naomi are mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Her name is Naomi. She said it very beautiful. I can't remember the exact words, but the concept was that just like Ruth followed Naomi, she is following her daughter-in-law. And she says she talks to her daughter-in-law and she says, "Don't worry, your kids are okay. I'm taking care of them." And she has taken on that role, but it was very beautiful the way she tied it into the relationship between a different mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, and put herself um, in that role. So it was very special. She's a special woman. Vicky, are you unmuting yourself because you want to say something?
I wanted to just mention how what a blessing it's been that the story you said to us during the time of the Exodus where it was the women's cries and there was this one particular woman I believe that cried out and it's really where the father where Hashem heard and I mean, literally, it was the cries of the moms and the cries of the women that brought out the Exodus, where Hashem was like, let's do this. And it reminds me so much of what is happening in Israel. So many times it's these women that are just standing up, and it literally brings me to tears. So I just wanted
Totally.
to thank you.
We thank you for that comment. I don't know if I said it exactly that way, but we do have a teaching that the redemption comes in the merit of the righteous women. That's what I might have said, and that was true in Egypt, and it's true. We understand it to be true now. And I was talking to my teacher today because we were studying today, and she has a point that women are compared to the Shekhinah, which is the divine feminine. I can't say that I can say much more about that, but the Shekhinah is in exile. Clearly, we are very comfortable to talk about Hashem and we see Hashem as masculine and so forth. But the idea of this is that everything that's associated with women in a sort of mystical way is still hidden. It's still the full force of it isn't in the world yet. And there are some people when it gets to that point where people understand who women really have been all through history, it's going to blow some minds. So, Helen, do you want to say something?
Sorry, I didn't want to change the subject, just I wondered, did you know anything about the little baby,
Yeah, so I asked her
Ragged?
about that. Ravid Chaim. I did ask her about that. She said she didn't say a lot, but she said he was 15 minutes without oxygen.
Yeah,
He's still in the hospital. And she did not sound
That's
very
it.
optimistic. But she said, we pray.
well, my husband was 10 minutes without oxygen. He's completely fine. So I'm praying and believing that this little one will
Wow.
be fine.
That's a beautiful thing to know. Valerie, you want
It
to
was
say something?
50, you say 50 minutes?
1-5.
Oh, 1 5, 15. Okay, okay.
Yeah, mine
No,
is.
I was
Natalie,
thinking
can you
like,
hold on? Hang on, because
of
Valerie
course.
started to speak.
Well, if she's talking about that, mine was on another subject, so let her finish like what she was going to say.
Okay,
Oh,
go
it
ahead.
was it was it was this, I was thinking about the same when you were speaking about Naomi. I was thinking about the Exodus, and right at the end, where there is so many orphans, and the family were taking the orphans, and suddenly I realized is what's happening in Israel. There is orphans, and the families have to share the children, and the grandparents are becoming mothers, and all of that, and this is for me is really part also of redemption of the
Right,
last time before redemption, I would
right,
say.
because we have a tradition that everything that happened in the Exodus from Egypt in some form or fashion will recur in the final redemption. It's like an echo or there's another name for the hologram, maybe. Like, I don't know if that's the right word, but there's some scientific thing of one thing that sort of is reflected in another. So there are lots of ways. Another parallel besides what you just said, which I've never heard before, that's a good Chiddush, that's a good new novel thought, is um, we see that when the Israelites left Egypt, that they didn't all leave, that there were lots of people who said, no, no, I'm fine, I'll stay here. And they died in the plague of darkness. The same thing is happening in the world where there are people, I'll say certainly among the Jewish people, but among the entire world, they are just like not on the redemption train, right? They're just like they don't see it. They're choosing to live their secular lives. They're not connected. And that's this dramatic period of what the rabbis call birur, which means division or separation, like teasing out one from the other. And that's the stage that we're in. And it's so obvious to me that the whole middle ground is disappearing. And we just have like good and evil, black and white, yes and no, God or not God. And everybody has the opportunity to choose. Valerie, you'll make the last comment, then we'll finish up.
Okay, because it's a little bit off of what y'all are just gonna make me cry, so I'm gonna talk about something else. Um, One of the things that I noticed going through the uh, Tanakh when I was going through actually in an interlinear, and it was striking to me the conversation between Naomi and Ruth, and it's where you go, I will go, where you lodge, I will lodge. But it changes to present tense when Ruth says, your people, not in the Hebrew, it doesn't say will be my people. It said, your people are my people, and your God is my God. So for the people who think that maybe they hadn't, like whatever their conversion status was, Ruth considered, that Gentile considered that the God of Israel was her God and those people were her people, which I think is significant considering your audience.
Ruth is the um, model that we have for somebody who chooses to step away from the way that they were raised, and whether formally converting today, I'm speaking of, whether formally converting or just aligning with the Jewish people, all of you, wherever you are holding spiritually, I sense about all of you that you see that things are getting harder for the Jews around the world. And there are lots of people who are not shy about expressing their hatred for Israel and for the Jewish people. And I consider you, when Jews get together, we talk about this. And a lot of Jews say, everybody hates us, the whole world's against us, blah, blah, blah. And I always say, that's not true. I know for a fact that that's not true because I know all of you. Now I'm going to get all choked up, but we are very blessed to have what we have together, you guys and me. And I appreciate the opportunity to educate Jews about the fact that there are people who are not yet or not ever going to be Jews, but who have uh, loyalty to the same God and to the same scripture and to the land. And that really makes a difference. It really makes a difference because a lot of people are not lucky like me. They don't know people like you.
One other question that I had for you was, had you heard I don't know which commentary, where I read it, but at one point in my study on the Book of Ruth, I actually read that there are those who believe that Ruth was actually, so she was inside the royal family as the daughter of the king of Moab, but that she actually had a Israeli background. It was like an Israeli family who actually married her into that royal house. And so that was one explanation as to why she would say, your people are my people and your
I've
God is
never heard that.
um so
Outside of her marriage to um, whichever brother she married.
okay. It wasn't a Christian commentary,
Lachlan.
it was something. I don't know. I don't, and I couldn't tell you where I read that, but I thought that that was interesting based on her. I mean, I'd already noticed that she was saying present tense, and I assumed that she had converted as she was marrying into the family, or like you were saying, a kind of conversion before that. But the also one other point in that fact is that one of the videos by Rabbi David Foreman, who does the Aleph Beta, he points out that, like what causes God to love some people. And like for Abraham, he and Ruth, and for Tamar, it was they all wanted to practice the Yibum. Like Abraham was related to Sarah and took her, when his brother died or whatever. Um, like for Ruth to want to have that performed for her husband through Boaz, and for Tamar to want to have that performed, through Judah's children. The fact is that they wanted to raise up a righteous seed for God caused him to love them, and so I
Wow.
think that kind of a like why did he choose her? Maybe that's why.
That's beautiful.
Mhm.
Okay, our time, Natalie, do you have to say something like really pressing or not so much? Okay. All right. All right. So thank you very much. There was 3 weeks of Aishet Chayil. Thank you for your beautiful comments. And God willing, next week we will go back to the book of Bamidbar. We'll start with the second parsha, Naso. And Vicky, I saw that you asked. I will send a screenshot of Hillel Fools' post where he says it's all over for Hamas. May Hashem hear. Okay. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you so much, Rivka.
Bye.